Hello and welcome. What exactly are Iran's intentions with its nuclear program? Announcement of its longer-range missile tests and disclosure of a second nuclear site have heightened global concerns and certainly set back efforts towards a nuclear-free world. Iran's surprise declaration last week that it's building another nuclear plant has increased pressure on Tehran ahead of a key meeting on Thursday in Geneva on its nuclear capabilities. Tehran says this uranium enrichment facility won't be operational for at least 18 months, and it claims no official notification requirements have been violated. Well, even so, one of Iran's main allies, Russia, agreed that the Islamic Republic had breached UN resolutions and called on Iran to quickly prove its nuclear program is peaceful. Another strong supporter, China, also urged the Iranian government to cooperate with UN inspectors. On today's show, we ask how far off is global disarmament while countries still have nuclear ambitions. Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part, and we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Joining me here in the studio to discuss these issues is a member of the Global Zero Commission, Richard Burt. Ambassador Burt served as the chief US negotiator in the strategic arms reduction talks with the former Soviet Union. Among many other high-level diplomatic appointments, he was also US ambassador to Germany during the Reagan administration. Ambassador Burt, good to have you here, sir.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
So, major powers meeting in Geneva on Thursday to tackle concerns about Iran's nuclear aspirations. What realistically do you expect to come out of those talks?
Well, I'm a little bit pessimistic about this meeting. The fact that it's taking place immediately after this disclosure over the weekend about the hidden nuclear uranium enrichment facility in Iran, and the fact that the Iranians then immediately afterwards have tested these missiles, tells me that while it may not be confrontational, I wouldn't expect a great deal of clarity or progress to come out. I do hope, though, then it does lead to follow-on meetings, because I think it's important that we continue to talk to the Iranians, and I hope it leads the Iranians also to begin real discussions with the IAEA, the Atomic Energy Agency.
Well, sir, often people, critics and analysts often say that there's often a positioning game, and that perhaps Iran here doing these tests and declaring the second site, it's a way to put them in a stronger position for when they have their meetings on Thursday, perhaps more to play with.
Well, maybe, but the problem is, of course, this disclosure that the Iranians made in this sort of one-sentence statement they sent to the Atomic Agency in Vienna was really, I think, a maneuver at the last minute when the Iranians understood that the United States, Britain, and France were in receipt of this intelligence about this hidden enrichment facility, and it's that's the problem. It's the fact that that the Iranians don't appear to be willing, as of yet, to be fully transparent about their nuclear ambitions.
How much of a unique opportunity is it, the fact that it's really, I guess, the first time that Iranian and US officials will be able to meet face to face?
Well, yes, there was an earlier meeting this year with the Undersecretary of State, William Burns, and he will be apparently attending this next meeting. Again, it may be because of the circumstances, I'm afraid this won't be necessarily very productive, but I hope, again, that it keeps the door open, because I think there is the possibility of a productive exchange with Tehran.
Based on your experience, so what do you see as Iran's end goal? What do you think it really wants to achieve?
Well, it's not clear, and that's the problem. My own personal view is that while they're moving right up to the threshold of making it a decision to acquire nuclear weapons, they haven't taken that decision yet. But they're certainly acquiring the capability both to develop the necessary enriched uranium on the one hand and the missiles on the other. I think their major ambition is to be a preeminent power in the region. They want, I think, a country with a very old culture, a very long tradition. They want to be taken seriously in the region and to have major influence on what happens in the region.
Well, interestingly enough, two of the countries that serve as Iran's allies a lot of the time, Russia and China, have both pulled back in this case and actually been fairly hard in their comments on Iran, on what's been happening.
Well, that's true, especially of the Russians.
Right. And to what extent do you think that might actually have some bearing on how Iran moves forward?
Well, it can be helpful. I think if the Iranians conclude that they don't have strong supporters in what people call the P5, the permanent members of the UN Security Council, it means that there could be tough sanctions action taken against Iran at some point later this year or maybe early next year. And so it may force the Iranians to be a little bit more open and flexible in any negotiations.
Now, President Obama was, of course, criticized for deciding to scrap the missile program, the missile defense system in Poland and the Czech Republic just a little while ago. And he was accused of caving into Russian pressure. And I know you don't see it quite that way.
No, not at all. I think first and foremost, it was a military decision based on our understanding of the evolving Iranian threat. Both the Bush administration and now the Obama administration have said that this was not meant to be directed against the Russians. And I think there's an understanding that Iran was not proceeding with a long-range missile that could strike targets in Northern Europe, that its missile program is mainly regional and to some extent could threaten Southern Europe. So the system in Poland and the Czech Republic really didn't make sense. And so it replaced that system with a shorter range system. But it did have, and I will say this, the byproduct of removing an important obstacle in the U.S.-Russian bilateral negotiations on nuclear arms reductions. And I think it's improved the overall atmosphere, and I welcome that.
So we have a caller from the United Kingdom. Saeed's on the line. Saeed, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I was wondering, how come Israel and America get to keep their nuclear weapons, and basically Israel is using it against Palestine, and how come Iran can't keep their nuclear weapons?
I'll follow up with Saeed's question with an email question that we got, or a Facebook question from Imad Udin, touches on the same thing here. He said, what about Israel? Do they deserve to be the only ones in the region to have an atomic weapon? Why doesn't the United Nations put pressure on them? And I guess this is one that comes up a lot from our viewers.
Sure, and it's an understandable question. First of all, it's important to recognize that there's a difference between the United States and Israel when it comes to nuclear weapons. The United States is a declared nuclear state. It joined and helped negotiate the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968. And that treaty said that countries that had nuclear weapons could keep them, but they had to make an effort to reduce them. And that's precisely what the United States is trying to do. Israel's in another category. They're an undeclared nuclear power. I think everybody knows that they possess nuclear weapons. And I think it would be quite helpful, my personal view is it'd be very helpful if Israel entered the nuclear non-proliferation regime. But, you know, I don't think the problem of Iranian nuclearization is Israel. I don't think that Iran wants to attack Israel with nuclear weapons. I think the problem with Iranian nuclearization is that it could lead to further spread of nuclear weapons in the region. I think if Iran goes nuclear, I think Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and other Arab states could go nuclear, and that would break the non-proliferation regime. It would lead to new nuclear powers, the spread of new nuclear powers, and it would make the effort that I'm involved with, the effort to eliminate all nuclear weapons over the next 10 or 20 years, almost impossible.
I'll touch more on the issue of general non-proliferation a little bit later in the show, but I also want to ask you about the Arab nations. There's a feeling among many people that the Arab nations, certainly Saudi Arabia and its Gulf neighbors, have more to fear from Iran becoming nuclear than Israel. And I think this is the point you're touching on to some degree here. Could those neighboring countries there have any kind of influence in what happens as far as Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Well, I think Iran wants to take their views into account. I mean, Iran is playing a very complicated game. On the one hand, as I said earlier, I think Iran would like to be the preeminent regional power and have a very important voice in all Middle Eastern affairs. But at the same time, I think it does desire good relations with its Arab neighbors. And so any decision that will be taken by the Iranians on nuclear weapons, and remember, I don't think they've quite gotten to that point yet, they'll have to balance those two factors off. And so I think it's very important for the Arab states to weigh in on this debate, to very publicly express their concerns about the nuclear program on the one hand, but also find ways to cooperate and work with the Iranians. And so the Iranians can conclude that it would be very destabilizing were they to go down the path of nuclear weapons.
We touched on China. What role could China play here? Of course, it's got trading relationships in the region as well, and it could actually be a fairly big player. Russia's been more influential, as you say, in this case, or at least more vocal. What about China?
Well, China is an emerging global economic superpower. And increasingly, China wants to access oil and natural gas from the Middle East. Its influence in the region will definitely grow. And so I think that their concerns about nuclear non-proliferation will also grow. The two countries that arguably have the greatest interest, existing nuclear powers that have the greatest interest in, I think, heading off a nuclear arms race in the Middle East are China and Russia, because they happen to be close by. They could be somehow drawn into a nuclear conflict in that region. And so I think China is increasingly going to get involved in this problem.
Now, we've got a question that came in from our live station chat room that goes out as we go out live here. Charles in the US says, how can the US shun Iran's nuclear program when the US and the West doesn't want to give up weapons of their own?
Well, we do. In fact, most people aren't aware of the fact that when I negotiated the START treaty with the Russians in the early 90s, the United States had a nuclear stockpile of about 6,000 nuclear weapons. That stockpile now is now about 2,500 nuclear weapons. Now, it's important to bear in mind that the United States and Russia still have 95% of the world's nuclear weapons, and that's why President Obama has sent his people, and the Russians have done the same, back to the negotiating table to reduce those weapons down to maybe 1,500 weapons, and then next year, perhaps in a follow-on negotiation, get down to as low as 1,000. So I think Obama recognizes that there's a trade-off here. If we're going to tell other countries not to acquire nuclear weapons, we have to have a track record, some credibility in working hard to reduce our own, and I think that's the case now.
Well, Ambassador, more questions for you. We're going to take a very short break here. As we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com, enter the chat room where debate's taking place right now. We'll be right back.